YouTube. God bless those of you who keep the Torah. God bless those of you who know that Jesus is the Messiah and attempt to follow his example. And for those of you who don't, well, God's not with you. So keep the Torah, follow Christ, so God can be with you. We will be discussing the book of Deuteronomy, known as the book of the law of Moses, the most important book in the Bible by far. If everyone would read the book of Deuteronomy one time in their lives, it would change the way we look at everything. It would change the way we look at Israel. It would change the way we look at the history of the Jews. It would change the way we look at God. We would understand what God expects from us. The law of Moses is very important. And there's a tiny little bit of the law of Moses in Genesis, which is basically just the circumcision. There's a lot more of it in Exodus, starting in chapter 12 with the Passover, and then more details later on. But the vast majority of the law of Moses can be found in the book of Deuteronomy, except for the Levitical priesthood stuff. It doesn't really go into detail about how you want to give the burnt sacrifices. It does give some explanations, it does give some information on that, but very little. But everything else can basically be found in Deuteronomy. So, Deuteronomy, the book of the law. 34 chapters. The law begins in chapter 5, but basically Moses is speaking as a mouthpiece for God. I mean, Moses is like halfway to becoming an angel. He goes up to Mount Horeb to speak with God, almost face to face. He doesn't get to see God's face because he'll be killed, but he sees almost everything except he sees his hands, he sees his back, he sees almost everything except for his face. He sees him, I think he sees him in the robe. God has a very bright white robe. You can read about that in Exodus, somewhere around Exodus 32, I think it was. Maybe Exodus 33. But the point being is that when Moses comes down the mountain, his face is glowing. So Moses is practically like an angel in human form because he's so close to God. And everybody, all of Israel knows that Moses is the mouthpiece of God. That if you doubt Moses, you doubt God. So, his last words before dying, before they cross over the Jordan River to possess Israel in the days of Joshua. Deuteronomy 29:21. Yahweh shall separate him unto evil out of all the tribes of Israel according to all the curses of the covenant that are written in this book of the law. So this book is Deuteronomy. This is the book of the law. And he goes into detail. Cursed is he who fornicates with an animal. Cursed is he who builds an altar to a pagan god. Like, there's all these curses and there's all these blessings. And essentially, it's like, this is what's going to happen to you in the future because you're not going to take this law seriously. So right here, this book of the law, Deuteronomy 30:10. If you shall listen unto the voice of Yahweh your Elohim to keep his commandments and his statutes which are written in this book of the law, and if you turn unto Yahweh your God with your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul. Deuteronomy 31:26. Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of Yahweh your Elohim, that it may be there for a witness against you. So this book is like a time capsule from 3,500 years ago. It really is. Deuteronomy is like the last words of Moses, perfectly preserved in a time capsule from all the way back then. Joshua 1:8. So Moses is dead, but before he dies, he lays his hands on Joshua. He transfers his authority to him through the Holy Spirit. And God speaks to Joshua and basically says, as I was with Moses, I will be with you. You will lead Israel. So this book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate therein day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Joshua 8:31. As Moses, the servant of Yahweh, commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones, which no man has lifted up any iron, and they offered thereon burnt offerings to Yahweh and sacrificed peace offerings. Joshua 8:34. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the cursings, according to all that is written in the book of the law. Joshua 23:6. So I'm telling you guys, you need to read Deuteronomy. If you don't read Deuteronomy, you don't understand the covenant. You don't understand God. You don't understand Israel. You don't understand what Judaism is supposed to be. Everyone's completely forgotten what this law of Moses is about. Very few people actually believe in the law of Moses. So the law of Moses is the foundation for our relationship. The prophets followed the law of Moses. Therefore, God gave them these revelations. And all of the prophets on top of the law of Moses. Basically the prophets are layers on top of the law of Moses, pointing to Christ. He will be born of a virgin. He will die for our sins. All this stuff. So Joshua 23:6. Be you therefore very courageous to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, and you turn not aside thereof to the right or to the left. Joshua 24:26. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, of Elohim, and took a great stone and set it up there under an oak that was by the sanctuary of Yahweh. So this would be the tabernacle, the tent. They didn't have a house for God yet. They brought the Ark of the Covenant in basically tents, which would be transported from, one campsite to another. 2 Kings 14:6. But the children of the murderers he slew not, according to that which is written in the book of the law of Moses, wherein Yahweh commanded, saying, The fathers shall not be put to death for the children, nor the children to be put to death for the fathers, but every man shall be put to death for his own sin. And that verse is Deuteronomy 24:16. 2 Kings 22:8. So this is King Joshua. He sends somebody to the temple to look for gold for some renovations. Israel has fallen into complete chaos, paganism, sodomites, everything. It was a really bad time for Israel. Hilkiah the high priest said unto Shaphan the scribe, I have found the book of the law in the house of Yahweh. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, and he read it. So they bring it back to the king, King Josiah, and he realizes how badly everything's going to go for them. This is before the Babylonian captivity, by the way. So he tears his clothes and he realizes we have to get right with God quickly. And he does everything he can. And God says, because you have done this, I will not let you will die before what happens. And so he dies in battle. And then shortly afterwards, the Babylonian captivity happens. And it's like the worst thing that Israel had ever seen. So 2 Kings 22:11, it came to pass when the king had heard the words of the book of the law that he ripped his clothes. 2 Chronicles 17:9, and they taught in Judah and had the book of the law of Yahweh with them and went about throughout all the cities of Judah and taught the people. See, this is what we got to be doing. We got to teach people Deuteronomy. 2 Chronicles 34:14, and when they brought out the money that was brought into the house of Yahweh, Hilkiah the priest found a book of the law of Yahweh given by Moses. 2 Chronicles 34:15. And Hilkiah answered and said to Shaphan the scribe, I found the book of the law in the house of Yahweh, and Hilkiah delivered the book to Shaphan. Nehemiah. So they come back from Babylon after 70 years in captivity, and they're reintroducing Israel to the law of Moses because they'd forgotten. After 70 years in captivity, they practically forgot how to be Jews. So all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate, and they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which Yahweh had commanded to Israel. So this is where we have to be. We have to read this book. We have to share this book with others. This is, this is the most important book to ever be written. Yes, the entire Bible is very valuable. But if there is only one book of the Bible that's worth memorizing and reciting and sharing with everybody at all times, it would be Deuteronomy. Because everybody's supposed to agree about Moses, the Ten Commandments, the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims. We all point to Moses. Yes, he was a prophet. But the Muslims don't believe anything he said because they believe what Muhammad said he said. And the Christians are confused about the law of Moses. They think they don't have to keep it anymore because basically Constantine corrupted Christianity with Roman paganism. But if you can convince the Christians and the Jews of the importance of the law of Moses, we can finally fix this problem. Nehemiah 8:3. He read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning until midday, before the men and the women and those that could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive unto the book of the law. So blast it. Blast Deuteronomy full blast as loudly as you can to everybody who will hear it. Nehemiah 8:18. Also day by day from the first day unto the last day he read in the book of the law of God, and they kept the feast 7 days, and on the 8th day was a solemn assembly according unto the manner. So this might have been Passover or one of the other sacred holidays. Nehemiah 9:3. And they stood up in their place and read in the book of the law of Yahweh their God 1/4 part of the day, and another 4th part they confessed and worshipped Yahweh their Elohim. Now, personally, I don't like Paul. I think Paul taught a doctrine completely heretical to the law of Moses. He was teaching this to the Gentiles, and Peter basically got this ball rolling when Peter decided not to teach the Torah to the Gentiles, he called it a burden. Why would we put this burden on the necks of the Gentiles, which we nor our fathers could bear? So he's like, let's just give them a watered down version of the Torah, and if they want to study the Torah, they can go to a synagogue. And everybody agreed to this. So Peter basically started this mistake, and Paul continued it. But this is heretical. Galatians 3:10. For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. For it is written, Cursed is everyone that continues not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. Well, let's put this in the proper context. So Paul is saying the law of Moses is a curse. Don't try to follow the law of Moses. Don't try to be perfect through the law, because you're going to put a curse on yourself. But this is only half the story. You're blessed if you keep the law. You're cursed if you reject it. All the heathen nations are cursed by default because the heathens don't follow the law. That's why we have abortion. That's why we have witchcraft. That's why everything's going to hell all over the world at the same time, because nobody's following the law of Moses. Very few people are following parts of the law of Moses. And that's not enough. You have to follow all of it to the best of your abilities, all of it. And here Paul is basically teaching against it, saying the law of Moses is a curse. And that seems to be his doctrine. I don't know why he changed his doctrine, because he used to be, in the book of Acts, the disciples were like, we heard rumors that you're teaching against the law of Moses. This isn't true, right? And Paul said he was zealous for the law and all this stuff. But then when Paul got away from the disciples, now he's teaching against the law of Moses. So what do we know about Paul? We know Paul was killing Christians. We know Paul was a Pharisee. We know Paul was a Roman citizen from Greece, from Tarsus, which is a region of Greece. So, which side was Paul on? Was Paul part of the synagogue of Satan? Was Paul confused? Who knows? But what we can say is that Paul is not an apostle. Jesus chose the 12. Judas hanged himself. There were 11. And the apostles decided to come together and choose another to succeed Judas. And they chose, I forgot what his name was, but they chose one early in the book of Acts. And those were the new 12. Paul doesn't count as an apostle, but he calls himself an apostle. And he teaches contrary to the law of Moses. That's very concerning.